Welcome to the X Factor. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Today, I am joined by Dawn Kovach, VP of Business Development at MeBeBot.com, an AI-powered assistant that delivers instant, accurate answers to employee and manager questions, improving communication and simplifying processes. MeBeBot is integrated into your knowledge-based systems like SharePoint and your communication systems like Slack, MS Teams, and web chat, providing 24/7 access for HR, IT, operational, and sales enablement questions, enabling HR and all units of the organization to spend more time focusing on more strategic business objectives. As a bonus, we will also discuss Dawn's parallel life as a writer with a special interest in Shakespeare, his life and his work, and how she balances her role with MeBeBot and her writing. Dawn, welcome.
Well, welcome, Charles. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Yes, same. So let me ask you, before your current role with MeBeBot, you've been an entrepreneur, having started several companies. Some organizations, even established ones, like to say they have an entrepreneurial mindset. In your view, what is an entrepreneurial mindset, and how does that apply to your work with MeBeBot?
So, Charles, I've had 5 businesses that I started from scratch. 3 were really successful. One was called National Computer Works. And that one, I ended up selling it after about 17 years. It actually drove me into being able to work with NASA. My mindset on being an entrepreneur, and I've taken this into MeBeBot and my other companies that I've worked with, you need to take initiatives and ownership over what your dreams really are. You need to take responsibility and you need to be able to act without being told. And you need to be able to follow through with those ideas that you're actually thinking of, right? You have to be persistent through failures. You have to learn from your setbacks and adapt quickly. I do a lot of art projects as well. And my daughter always laughs at me. How can you start this whole oil painting over and not be mad? I'm like, well, it's sort of learning. It's more an experiment, right? So that's what I'm saying. You really do have to work through failures, learn from those setbacks, be able to reset yourself, right? You have to learn to look really hard for gaps. It's nice to get into that mundane, everyday, thing, but you need to find where you can work on some efficiencies, different ways to solve problems, right? You have to be willing to take some calculated risks when you're pursuing those goals and improvements that you're looking for. You need to be able to not just be on the straight and narrow. You need to be able to look ahead. You need to be able to set those goals and stretch your mind, stretch beyond, what your immediate gains you think they are. So those are some of them. Keep learning, so that you're constructive. Create value for others, right? It's a lot of times when you think it's all about you, it is, because it feeds over. But you really do want to be able to create value for others, and I think you've just got to. Bottom line is you're. It's important to create relationships and partnerships and be able to scale to be able to work with more than just 1 or 2 people. So those, I think, are my main things that for being an entrepreneur.
Tell us about MeBeBot. What unmet need in the market does it address?
So when MeBeBot was started, we found a gap. That was what happened in that the HR teams have important things to do. They're working on new benefits. They're working on all these things. We found that they're spending an awful lot of time answering the same questions over and over, sometimes from the same person. What are my holidays? How do I get a new benefits card, right? And so in that gap, we found that there needed to be some automated way so that most of the questions that are coming in from employees, how do I get a new password? How do I get a new laptop? Most of these questions are answered 24/7 automatically. That's how it started. That's what we address, is that gap, so that the HR teams can go on to better better projects that they're working on. Also, the employees, when I remember when I was hired at one point, it was 6 weeks of training just to go through all the different systems they had, everything from SharePoint to, all these different systems that you had to log in and out of. So you're saving time for the HR teams, you're saving time for the employees, and that's what we do in the market.
So, yeah, I mentioned up top that MeBeBot is integrated into SharePoint and Slack, MS Teams, etc. What is the implementation process for
There
MeBeBot at
is
a
no
particular organization?
implementation at all. There is a configuration. All you really have to do is to exchange a password, and we can log into your SharePoint, or get you going onto your Teams or SharePoint or Slack. And so there is no integration at all. It's just a configuration. We have you up and going in 10 minutes.
So in 10 minutes, it's operational. I
So
could
it
enter
is
the system and ask
operational
questions.
now. Now, what we've moved into, and I don't know if this is one of your questions, we can ingest documents. So we also have around 350 questions that are already in the system. So when you're ingesting a document with AI, you can actually be non-prescriptive, where they can find those answers, or prescriptive. So we, in the configuration question, yes, you can be up and going. And then what you might want to do is go through those questions if you want them prescriptive, so that every time a person asks, what are the holidays, they're going to get the same answer. So you'll go through those questions, and that might take, we had a company with over 10,000 employees. It only took them 2 months to get up and going with all the questions that they tweaked, because you can edit them. Does that
Okay.
answer that question?
Yeah. So I guess implementation isn't the right word. Configuration is the right word. But ultimately, what I'm
Configuration.
asking is, how long does it take to actually be fully functional? Because obviously there's a little bit of a process.
So we have had companies that are smaller, 500 to 1,000, that are up and going within a weekend or a month, depending on how much time they want to take into it to answer those questions. If they do want the guardrails and they want them prescriptive. Again, we had a company that had over 10,000 employees in over 30 countries, and they were up and going within 6 weeks.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Um, So again, maybe bot integrates with an organization's communication system. Is there a privacy concern that people's conversations being monitored without their explicit knowledge?
So in general, maybe bots designed to respect user privacy and data standards, right? We actually, our solution has been vetted by the EEOC. So we work with company policies related to labor laws, benefits, payroll, where you can't afford legally to give employees answers that are AI hallucinating answers. So we've been vetted. We are not, the conversations with MeBeBot, on, are not they're not linked to individual identities. So that security, we've
Right,
covered all those levels of security.
right. Um, are there any developments pending with MeBeBot? Any new releases? Any amazing new features that you want to give us a sneak preview about?
It's funny. There are some things we're rolling out that I can't at this moment talk about, but yes, we've got new features. One of them that I'm very excited about is the fact that we can actually ingest all departments' information. So whether you're in payroll or finance or legal or IT or HR, we actually at this point can ingest all departments' information, so that no matter what department, if you're in sales and you want to see, show me the link to the latest presentation, we actually can cover all departments now. Where before we were more focused on HR and IT, payroll, benefits, now we actually can cover everything. So we are in the process of rolling that out and redesigning our website. So
Uh,
that is coming
Excellent.
shortly too.
Excellent. It's really kind of interesting that I'm having this conversation with you because I started my company Backbone around 96, 97. And my very first client was a company that put summary plan descriptions online, which at the time was not done. So they were kind of a pioneer in that way. And again, that's fairly narrow kind of document. It's a big document, but certainly narrow compared to what BBBot is ingesting and providing access to. It's several orders of magnitude, more advanced. But again, this is kind of how I started my company Backbone on this kind of technology. One of your blog posts about evaluating AI vendors, what HR leaders need to know. I'd encourage listeners to check that post out in its entirety. It's very, very insightful. What would your
Yeah.
short answer be regarding what HR leaders need to know about evaluating AI vendors?
Short answer, know what you're looking for. Know the core capabilities that you're really looking for in an AI solution. What can the AI solution actually do for you, for your company, for your teams? You need to know the type of AI you're looking for. You need to know the automation capabilities. You need to know about accuracy and content awareness, uh, multi channel support, personalization. In a short nutshell, I think those are important. You need to focus on the core capabilities that you're actually looking for.
So my understanding is that HR has been your primary focus with your sales and marketing outreach. What has been the reception thus far?
For MeBeBot,
Mhm.
oh, everybody loves it, and everybody says they want it. I think the difficulty we find is that it's been we've been at this for 6 years now. Um, this is not something that's been built into the budget because it was 6 years ago relatively new. So I think it's everybody loves MeBeBot. Everybody wants MeBeBot in their systems. Everybody sees that they need to be able to answer questions for frequently asked questions to employees and 24/7. So we've got very good response for MeBeBot.
Sort of a related issue. You and I talked about this in the lead up that one of the problems in organizations today, and actually I've written something about this kind of thing where there's just more and more people involved in the decision processes. Several years ago, it was 5 people, 7, now it's up to 9, 10, and obviously people from different organizations, different units in the organization need to weigh in. And you and I talked about the perennial issue. HR needs to be at the table. Somebody else I had in this podcast said, HR has I'm paraphrasing now, has a furniture fixation. They need to get to the table. And he said, no, that's not necessarily what they need to do, but that's certainly a minority view. So, given that, and this is an argument I made in any number of these conversations, given that AI lands disproportionately on an organization's people, which implicitly or even explicitly means that it's an HR issue, you'd think that this would impel HR, this would bring HR to the table because it also involves IT, it's going to involve operations, it's going to involve finance. So, what would you say about what HR needs to do? Because everybody at HR likes MeBeBot. It's a budget issue, so maybe it's not being properly framed. They're not bringing in some of these other units in the organization to wrap their heads around what it means to them to maybe get some more buy-in. What would you say to HR people who find themselves in that position?
HR needs to get out of the mindset that they can do everything manually. HR has sort of isolated themselves into their own departments, and they really need to get with IT. IT pretty much holds the purse, they hold the money strings. IT is the one that everybody's been focused on forever in getting those solutions for the entire companies and getting them going. And HR and IT haven't had as good and productive of communications as they should. What I say to HR people is get yourself educated, get yourself intelligent enough so that you can talk to IT and explain to them what your needs are. You're allowing IT to dictate to you what they think you might need. And that's different if you're looking at a family dynamic. A mother needs different needs than the father needs, than the children need. They need to communicate their needs better. And
Mhm.
HR needs to get their head around the fact that AI is here, AI is going to stay. How do you communicate with IT to let them know what those needs are? The small pocket that IT has that's handling HR is not enough. They need to get to the table.
Right. So, as promised, I want to ask about your parallel career as a writer. And let me begin by asking you a question that I ask anybody who tells me that they either want to be a writer or they are a writer, which is, what writers do you read? who are your favorite writers? That also is so always very instructive. It's always very illuminating when I find this out.
That's one of the best questions ever, because there are so many different writers that influence you in your life, right? However, three have been my favorites. Charles Dickens, one of them. I have every single piece of work he ever did. Well, I'm sure I'm lacking some, but and I've even visited his home in England like 5 different times at this point.
Wow.
William Shakespeare, and I have like a 1700 complete set of all his works, and I've been to Stratford and Avon half a dozen times. My husband's from Scotland, so I've been lucky enough to travel. And Tom Sawyer. And Charles Dickens, because he's like this champion of the underdog. So he's influenced me a lot there. He's got that, inspiration and empathy, social criticism, characters matter. And then William Shakespeare, I mean, oh my goodness, he's a total architect of human emotion, right? His influence has been there. And I love that he has themes of love, betrayal, identity, power. Like Shakespeare is one of the most, oh, I've got goosebumps talking about Shakespeare. Um, and then Mark Twain, I tell you that Mark Twain, he will make you giggle and laugh. He's really the voice of wit and truth, rebellion. He has this sharp humor, a social, deep commentary. He questions authority. He values freedom. He keeps that moral compass. So those are probably my three main writers that have influenced me forever and still do.
Okay, well, that is a very respectable Mount Rushmore. I should mention that Ron Chernow, famous for, of course, his bio on Alexander Hamilton. He also wrote a great bio on Ulysses Grant in Washington. He's coming out actually in about a week with his bio on Mark Twain. And I guarantee it's going to be pretty definitive. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. And by the way, there's an interesting connection between Grant and Twain. When Twain found out that Ulysses Grant cut this deal with a publishing company, and he was dying at the time to write his memoir. Twain was outraged because he was getting ripped off, had him out of that contract because Twain was also a publisher, published a memoir, and Grant, what his dying wish was essentially to leave his family some money. So thanks to Mark Twain, he was able to do that. So it's kind of an interesting connection. I can't wait to read that book. So tell us about some of the books you've written.
So I've written several books, and one of them was, it's funny, I wrote a book that's called The Last Baron of Budapest, and it's about 80% truth, like a history, and then the rest it turns into like a ghost story with a treasure hunt and what have you. But I wrote it mostly because my grandparents actually fled in 1917 from Budapest, had to leave all their money behind. They were killing all the aristocrats. They had to go. They ended up in the coast of Italy. They had to take a ship across to New York. They stayed in New York for a while, and then they ended up in LA. One of my grandfather went from being a wealthy man to being a tailor, is what he ended up doing. And I think I wrote that book because everyone's like, oh, these immigrants are taking our jobs. No, they're not. They came here to have a better life. They came here to be cooks and tailors and gardeners, farmers, and they came here for that. So I wrote that book, and it's an interesting book because one of my grandfather's best friends was Bela Lugosi. He actually was the tailor. He was a tailor for Bela Lugosi, all the capes and stuff you saw, my grandfather. So then, and he was also the tailor for Tom Mix. He was a famous cowboy back in the day. But so that's The Last Baron of Budapest. And then I mentioned some recipes. And since I mentioned these recipes, I had people, saying, can you just tell us about the recipes? So I actually put out a Hungarian cookbook. So you can find that, which has a bunch of family recipes, things I've been cooking all my life, things that, my aunts and what have you had cooked. So I've got that one. With the Shakespeare book I put out recently, I actually put out a Renaissance cookbook, which actually talks about the history of cooking back in the day, how they set their tables, how they developed their meals and what have you. And then I pair them with some of Shakespeare's quotes. And then also I pair, here would be a meal. Here's the drink, here's the meal, here's a cheers that they would have used, and so I did that too. And then I had written the Shakespeare book as well, but I've written several others, but those I think are my favorites.
Well, I'm particularly interested in the book you wrote about Shakespeare and his two brothers. I never knew he had two brothers.
There's 8 children in the family. So he had, I think there's only one daughter. He had multiple brothers. However, when I was researching about the Shakespeare book, what I found out is 2 of the brothers were actually in London at the same time as him. His very youngest brother, Edmund, worked at the Globe Theater when Shakespeare was a playwright there and a part owner at the Globe. And as I found that out, I started to try to research Edmund, and I found out that there are these historians who are like, oh yeah, he probably didn't even know his brother was there. I'm like, well, the Globe isn't that big, and if you're the big brother, I'm thinking you probably know that your little brother was there. I'm like, I think you might have known your brother was there.
Right.
And then Gilbert is another brother, and he actually started his career as a haberdasher. Now, his father was a glove maker. Probably people know that from sheep. There was a lot of sheep, right? And if you think of, like, say, the Three Musketeers with the gloves that were embroidered and the really fancy ones. So his father is this glove maker. His brother turns out a haberdasher, which means he's selling, buttons and clothes and hats and what have you. And then I find out that 2 of those brothers, Gilbert and Edmund, are actually in London while Shakespeare's there. And so when I put all those pieces together, I started to think that I didn't want to write a book about a history of Shakespeare. We all know a bit about Shakespeare, right? Instead, what came to me was that I would like to write something that has conversation. I've been going to the Renaissance Fair most of my life. I like Renaissance. And I thought, why don't we put in some conversation? Why don't we talk about how they really felt, how he really loved, what his family might have been like? So that's how I started that. I thought, I'm just going to write, like, let's get like my favorite writers. Let's get them into the feeling of how these men felt.
Anything on Shakespeare is a process of, it's like forensics. You have so little
It
to
is.
go on. You got to piece it together. So, the idea that you're writing sort of historical fiction, there's almost more license because even a biography of Shakespeare, you're having to take these leaps and it's just this process of deductions. And, in fact, I think I mentioned to you Stephen Greenblatt, the Yale lit professor. He's written some great books. A lot of them were sort of in the spirit of literary sleuthing, and he wrote Will in the World. And it's all based on that, trying to locate this human being we know as Shakespeare. So it's all kind of sleuthing. Anyway, I recommend people, you can find this on Amazon, correct?
It's on Amazon.
I know it's on Amazon because I saw it and I need to read it. Anyway, Dawn, it's a great conversation. I really appreciate you spending time with me. And I have a feeling this is going to be the first of several because, as I say, just about anybody who comes on, we have a really interesting conversation. We know that things are so fluid, things are moving so fast. What we're saying today could be very different, or the world could be very different. Our world could be very different in 3-6 months. So maybe we'll have you back on if you choose to accept the assignment.
I do, Charles. Thank you very much. What a pleasure to get to know you more and more.
Yes, no, same. Thanks, Dawn. I really do appreciate it. Today I spoke with Dawn Kovach, VP of Business Development at MeBeBot.com, an AI-powered assistant that delivers instant, accurate answers to employee and manager questions, improving communication and simplifying processes. This is Charles Epstein for The X Factor. Thanks for listening.